Help us reach 1,000 subscribers. I have always enjoyed exploring forgotten places. There's something intriguing about walking through abandoned buildings, imagining the stories that have been left behind. But nothing prepared me for what it's like to be on a remote farm, in the middle of dirt roads and empty fields. Since that night, I have never been able to sleep without turning on the lights. I was visiting a friend in a small town. He mentioned an abandoned farm that was a few kilometers away. The place, he said, was known for strange stories. People who disappeared and children coming from inside the house, even though it had been empty for years. I thought it was just exaggerated. I decided to go alone, armed with a flashlight and curiosity. The road to get there was lined with twisted trees, and the cloudy sky only made the atmosphere darker. When I arrived, it was already dark. The main house was large, with rotting wood and broken windows. The barn next to it looked like it was about to collapse, and the wind made the doors creak like muffled screams. I pushed the door of the house and stepped inside. The smell of old wood and mold was suffocating. The floor creaked under my feet, and each step echoed in the empty rooms. In the hallway, broken furniture lay scattered. There were yellowed papers and old photographs thrown on the floor. I picked one up. It showed a family, father, mother, and 2 children. But the faces were scratched out with something that looked like a marker. My heart raced, but I continued. I walked down a long corridor, shining my flashlight on the stained walls. That's when I heard the first sound. It was low, like a rustling coming from upstairs. I slowly climbed the stairs. Each step creaked, making it impossible to move without making noise. At the top, there was a narrow hallway with open doors on both sides. As I investigated the rooms, I saw something that made my blood run cold. On the wall of one of the rooms, there were handprints, small and dirty, as if children had passed through there. When I was about to leave, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned quickly, but there was no one there, just the echo of the creaking floorboards. My flashlight began to flicker, blinking as I tried to turn it on again. It was at that moment that I saw, for an instant, something move at the end of the hallway. I ran towards the stairs, but I heard a sound that made me stop. It was a soft crying, almost a wailing, coming from the room next door. Against my better judgment, I went in to check. In the corner, there was a turned-over chair and a cracked mirror. The sound continued, but there was no one there. Suddenly, the crying stopped. In the silence, I heard another sound. Something was scratching the walls of the hallway. My instincts were screaming at me to get out, but my legs felt seemingly glued to the floor. When I finally moved, I felt a cold touch on my shoulder. I ran down the stairs, not looking back. The hallway seemed longer than before, as if the house had changed. When I finally reached the door, it was locked. My fingers trembled as I tried to unlock it, but it felt stuck. That's when I heard heavy footsteps coming down the stairs. I managed to open the door at the last second and ran to the car. I drove as fast as I could without looking in the rearview mirror. The next day, I went back with my friend to retrieve the flashlight I had dropped. The house looked even more decrepit in the daylight. But the worst part was when I found the chair from the room in the middle of the hallway, as if someone had been dragged there. I never returned to that farm. And to this day, whenever I hear a rustling in the silence, I feel the same chill from that night. Report 2. I have always been curious about forgotten places. There's something about abandoned spaces that makes me imagine what happened there before they were left behind. But if you knew what you would find on that farm, you would never have crossed its rusty victims. That night, something happened, something that still makes me look over my shoulder whenever I am alone. It all started when I was visiting a cousin in a small town. He told me about an old farm set away from the main road. He said that no one went near it because people believed the place was cursed. I thought it was an exaggeration, but my curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my flashlight, a small knife, just for precaution, and decided to go there before sunset. The dirt road seemed endless. Dense trees lined the path, creating shadows that moved as the wind blew. When I finally arrived, the gate was down, rusty, covered in vines. The main house sat atop a small hill. Its windows were broken, and the peeling paint gave the impression that time had stopped there. I entered through the front door, which creaked as if warning me to leave. The interior was dark, with furniture covered in yellowed sheets. There were mud marks on the floor, like recent footprints. As I explored the rooms, I smelled something rotten, like spoiled meat. My flashlight illuminated corners covered in cobwebs and destroyed furniture. But what made me stop was a door at the end of the hallway. It was locked, but there were scratches around the lock, as if someone had tried to force it open. That's when I heard it. A low, scratching sound coming from behind that door. My first instinct was to leave, but for some reason, my curiosity won. I twisted the doorknob until the door opened with a click. The room was dark. In the center, there was a chair turned away from me. The walls had hand marks, as if someone had scraped their nails against the wood. As I approached, I heard a whisper, soft, almost imperceptible, coming from the corner of the room. The light from my flashlight began to flicker, and for a second, I thought I saw something move. I illuminated the corner. Nothing, just dancing shadows. But the whisper continued, as if it were beside me. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me. My flashlight failed completely, plunging the room into darkness. I felt something pass behind me, quickly, like a cold draft. I tried to open the door, but it was jammed. That's when I heard footsteps, heavy and slow, circling outside. My heart raced. The only exit was a small window covered by boards. As I tried to make space to crawl through, the sound of footsteps grew faster, as if whoever was out there was running toward me. Finally, I managed to create a gap in the window and scrambled outside. I fell to the ground and ran to the gate without looking back. When I reached the car, I realized I had left my flashlight and knife inside the house. It didn't matter. I just wanted to get out of there. Days later, I told my cousin what happened. He fell silent for a moment before saying, "You saw the footprints, didn't you? I've seen them too. But when I went back the next day, they were still there, and fresher." I never returned to that farm again. And to this day, when I think of the locked door and what might have been behind it, I feel a chill I cannot explain. Report 3. I have always been fascinated by abandoned places. Since I was a child, I loved exploring old houses, forgotten sheds, and deserted trails. But after I lived on that isolated farm, I realized that some doors should never be opened. What happened that night still haunts me. A farm located miles from the nearest town, hidden at the end of a poorly maintained dirt road. I had heard stories about the place, disappearances, lights seen at night, inexplicable sounds, but I never paid much attention. I decided to go there alone, just to prove that they were only legends. I left in the late afternoon, and by the time I arrived, the sun was already setting. The main house was huge but dilapidated, with rotten boards and broken windows. The barn next door looked like it was on the verge of collapse. I parked the car near the entrance and grabbed my flashlight. The silence was so heavy that even my footsteps felt too loud. Upon entering the house, the smell of old wood and mildew filled the air. The floor creaked with every movement, and the echo made everything seem larger and emptier. In the main room, antique furniture was covered with dusty sheets. In the corner, an armchair facing the window looked like it had still been used. I explored the room slowly. I found a kitchen with rusty furniture and a bedroom with a broken crib. But what made me uncomfortable was the attic. The staircase leading up was open, and the air coming from there was colder. I climbed carefully. The attic was small and dark, with stacked boxes and scattered papers. Among the papers, I found a diary. The pages were yellowed and torn, but a few sentences were still legible. "They come at night. I can't sleep anymore. I am being watched. I closed the diary and went downstairs, but as soon as I set foot on the lower floor, I heard something. A faint shuffling sound coming from upstairs. I froze. My flashlight trembled in my hands. I looked up and saw a shadow moving down the hallway. Is anyone there? My voice came out low and shaky. No answer, just the sound of footsteps continuing. When I looked again, I saw the shadow standing at the top of the stairs. It wasn't moving, but it seemed to be watching me. I ran to the door, but when I pulled the handle, I realized it was locked. I tried to open a window nearby, but it wouldn't budge either. That's when I heard a suggestion. Low, coming from the hallway. Something was coming toward me. The flashlight flickered and went out. I was left in the dark with the sound of footsteps growing closer. I used my phone to light the way and headed toward the kitchen, trying to find another way out. I found a door at the back, but it was locked too. Then the sound stopped. The silence was even worse. It felt like the air had become heavier. When I looked back, I saw the shadow again. This time it was closer. You could see it was humanoid, but something was wrong with it. Its movements were distorted, as if it was struggling against its own body. I managed to break a window with a chair and jumped outside. I ran to the car, but when I tried to start it, the engine wouldn't turn over. I looked at the house and saw the silhouette in the attic window, motionless, watching me. When I finally got the car to work, I sped down the dirt road without looking back. The next day, I returned with a friend, but the house was different. All the windows were intact, and the front door was locked with rusty padlocks. I never returned to that true farm again, and to this day I avoid dirt roads and abandoned houses. Some stories should not be investigated.